SuperTalk Mississippi Media production.
Recovery is a team sport, and Parkwood Behavioral Health System can help you get back in the game of life and break free from addiction. Visit parkwoodbhs.com. Parkwood, your recovery team for life's biggest wins. With limited exceptions, physicians are not employees or agents of this facility.
This is Gerard Gibert, and thank you for listening to MidDays here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Midday SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Will East in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music. Morning there, Will.
Morning, Gerard.
We got the whole dang SuperTalk team up here for meetings, and they filled up the parking lot.
Yes. Some days this parking lot is empty.
That's right.
And some days it's very, very much full.
Good to see all the folks, though, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
we talk to them a lot and communicate with them, but they're scattered about the state, taking care of business as we are a statewide network. You know, as far as I know, are we not now the only statewide radio network in the country?
The only one. I don't know of another one. You have some states that are smaller in size, so they don't, like Rhode Island, for example. You put a big 100,000 watt station in Rhode Island, you're going to cover a large part of the state. But we're the only ones that I know of.
Well, I will tell you this. I have met with political leaders in other states, believe it or not, at the football games up in Oxford, when our statewide political leaders are often in attendance. And they'll introduce me to them, and they'll introduce, of course, what I do, share with them what I do. They're all jealous of the fact that we have this ability to communicate statewide, especially, you can imagine, from a political perspective. When you're campaigning, for example, as a place you want to get your message heard, this is it. But, of course, when we get into session, and we're analyzing the activities right down there in Jackson at the legislature, we're able to talk to the entire state about that. So sometimes we don't mention that. I just want to share that with the audience. I'm not sure that most people know this is the only dang statewide network in the whole country.
That was kind of the idea behind it, because you would have, back in the old days, you would have a politician from, let's say, I'm going to use Corinth as an example.
Yeah.
Politician from Corinth would say one thing to his constituents, go down to Jackson, vote completely the opposite, and come back home, and nobody would be the wiser. Because, you know, people aren't reading the newspaper that in depth, and maybe it didn't even cover it.
That's right.
And so, and then when SuperTalk came along, it was like, wait a minute.
Come on, Will. You know that doesn't happen. Promise one thing during the campaign, but behave a different way.
Wait a minute.
That doesn't happen. Come on. Well, just wanted to point that out. Thinking about that because of all the fine SuperTalk team that is on hand here, having meetings as they wind down this year and prepare for next year. That's what's going on. But it's good to see all the folks. We're all buckled in, ready to go. A whole bunch of stuff happening. We got Jeremy Nelson, the president of Element Wealth. He's coming in the next segment. Maybe he can unravel all this volatility in the markets. The Dow up. It was down earlier. It's up 136 points at this moment. The NASDAQ has also turned positive, up 22 points. But what's really bothering folks, Will, is that the 10-year interest rate, the Treasury, the 10-year Treasury, it's up again, and that is concerning investors somewhat. The Fed, they start meeting tomorrow. We'll see what they're going to do. It's widely believed that they are going to cut the benchmark rate by a quarter point. Why do we focus again on the 10-year Treasury? Because, folks, that's what your mortgages are tied to. If you borrow money to finance a vehicle, it's tied to that. Your credit cards, tied to that. Basically, consumer credit in general is tied to the 10-year. There are different maturities of Treasury notes, bills, and bonds, depending on the maturity. A bond would be 10 years and more, for example. A bill would be, I think, less than 2 years, and the notes of everything in between. But it's that 10-year, right smack dab in the middle. That's what really is connected to and drives those interest rates you pay. You know, the president has been campaigning for quite some time to cut the rates even further because he knows that is often an obstacle to folks getting into a house, for example. And this whole word, Will, affordability, man, that is just now dominating the national political landscape. In fact, the president hitting the road today to try to get ahead of this because I think it's fair to say the Democrats have kind of hijacked the word and really was popularized in Zoran Mondami's campaign. That's all he talked about, affordability. And, you know, people say, I don't care if he's a communist, I just want cheaper stuff. That's the problem we have in this country. And you know what they say, that money talks and BS walks. It's the old saying. And that's kind of what's going on. So the president says that the GOP is fixing an inherited mess and that his plan to tackle persistent inflation and address economic concerns is underway. He is going to be in the Poconos region of Pennsylvania today. So I appreciate the president going out and doing this, but I will just make a general observation here with respect to politics, because keep in mind what this is all about. We're inside a year till we go back to the ballot box and vote for every member of the House, of course. Those races are contested every 2 years. Were the founders visionary with that or what, if you think about it? Now, the problem is in today's world, it's like the day after they get elected, they're campaigning again.
They never stop.
Never stops. And that's become a problem. And it just seems like that these campaigns are getting longer and longer to the point where, man, I'm sick of it. I hear that all the time. Do you not? What are we doing with all this campaign stuff going on? It's like I'm not voting for 2 years or a year or something.
But in their world, that's tomorrow.
That's exactly right. And thinking they're getting ahead and they're trying to raise money. But the president is out and about and is kind of making a barnstorming tour here to talk about affordability. Now, the observation I was going to make, and I'm not trying to be critical of the president here, it's just an observation. Generally speaking, when you're explaining, you're losing. His poll numbers are down. We have to be honest about that. And you could say, I don't believe in polls. But when you look, Will, at a cross-section of polls, pretty reliable, honestly, as far as a reflection of voter sentiment. I think a lot of that, however, is driven by impatience. We're just impatient. We expect everything now. That is, and a lot of that's because all this technology that's developed through the last few decades, everything's instant. You don't wait for anything. You want to know something? Just pick the dang phone up and start tapping on it. There's every fact known to man at your fingertips instantly. You want to share something with somebody? It's instant. You want to buy something? It's instant. That's what we're accustomed to. But you know what? As the president says, I inherited a big old mess. Rome wasn't built in a day, as the old metaphorical saying goes. And he's absolutely right about that. But, man, people want instant. Now, I think this would be, if I were advising the president, if you go out and say, look, this is better, that better, that people can sort of make their own minds up about their personal financial situations. And if you try to tell them it's better, I'm not sure that that's an effective strategy. But I get it. What I think people want to hear, and I do believe the president's going to talk about this, the policies we've implemented, such as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the Working Families Tax Act, I think as it's now been renamed, rebranded somewhat, really starts to kick in next year. Now, the problem with that is I've seen Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he was on the weekend Sunday shows talking a lot about this. You know, you can also get over your skis a little bit when you start saying, look, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, this is going to happen. And then when it doesn't, you get crucified in the election. So please be careful and be conservative in your estimates and reasonable about. It would have been devastating had we not extended the Trump tax cuts from 17 under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and then we layered on exemption or deductibility of the premium portion of overtime, tips, increased standard deduction on seniors. All that sort of stuff's great. I also agree, hasn't fully kicked in yet. But, man, don't just predict that it's going to be all coming up roses. That's a little dangerous, too. We're stepping aside. Jeremy Nelson is next. This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
We're rolling. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
What? This is so
awesome. On SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. Thanks so much for joining us. Tuesday in December. Hard to believe, Will. We're running out of days here. I saw a big billboard out on 55 on my route in. It's one of those electronic billboards, you know, and it noted that we're 16 days away from Christmas. Like, really? Are we? Yeah, it's December 9th. So.
I haven't bought the first thing.
Me either. We're pleased to welcome now into the Element Wealth Studio, Jeremy Nelson, the president of Element Wealth. All right, Jeremy, what's going on, man?
Man, it's the race to the end of the year, right? Yeah. I mean, it's crazy in our industry, right? Because you got required minimum distributions and, you know, tax planning and so many different things that you got to do in this month, right? So it's a busy time for us.
Well, I'll even bring this one up. You're too young to remember this probably. You weren't into the business world yet, but I was. And that's the investment tax credit, okay, the ITC. And that ended, I want to say 86, 87, something like that in that time frame when Reagan was in office. So we have similar tax policy now, the immediate expensing. But back then, in my industry, because what we sold qualified for that, the equipment itself, there was a rush. I mean, I literally would stay at the office for the 2 years that we were in business when that was still around, till 7 or 8 o'clock at night, helping our big business customers with orders because they had to get that in and get it on the books. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And by the way, Gerard, invoice me now even though you're not going to deliver for a few weeks, right?
Yeah.
They wanted that invoice in hand to get that tax credit on their corporate income tax. It was called the investment tax credit. We don't have that anymore. We got something similar to that in the immediate expensing. But just thinking about the end of the year rush that you were talking about.
It really is. It's a real thing in the planning world because, you know, you think about, you know, if you want to do Roth conversions, like they got to be done. Yeah. You can't wait till the end of the year and see how much it was and then retroactively go back.
You lose the year benefit.
You got required minimum distributions. You got to get them out. So there's stuff that, you know, that 31st is a big day for us.
Explain that to the folks, the required minimum distributions.
So if you're 73 and over, then you are required to take a certain amount out of your IRA. So generally, if you're turning 73 this year, it's a little bit less than 4% of your IRA that you're required to take out. And every single year as you get older and older, the percent of your IRA that you have to take out gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Remember, you got this tax deduction, putting the money in, growing tax deferred. Now the government's saying, hey, it's time to pony up. So 73 is the age. A lot of people think that it's 70 and a half.
Right.
It used to be. And then it changed to 72. Now it's 73. Eventually it's going to go up to 75, though.
Okay. Gotcha. So some changes going on there, and of course, numerous changes in the Families First Tax Act. I think was the rebranding of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. All that stuff kicks in. Some of it's retroactive tax provisions. Yep. January of this year. Some goes in next year. Some in the out years. But that's got the CPAs and the payroll companies all scrambling as well.
I mean, it's a real challenge, right? I mean, things like, if you're a highly compensated person on your retirement plan, then your catch-up contributions are going to have to go Roth. And so the payroll providers are all trying to figure out with the record keepers, how they're going to make all this work. So it's a lot. Yeah,
it is. But that's what keeps us in business, keeps us all busy. So let's talk a little bit about just the investing. I mean, that's what you guys do at Element Wealth is you help people manage their assets and ensure that their goals and objectives are met. Full disclosure, I've said this before. Yep. I am a satisfied client of Element Wealth. You and I sat down 5 years ago when we made a deposit there and mapped out a plan, and we followed that plan. And I don't bother you about it. I trust you and your team and what you guys do. And the only time I'd ever say anything is if there's something that doesn't look quite right, and that's pretty rare, as you know. So we appreciate that. But what should people be thinking about right now with respect to these markets, which every day it's a new series of surprises, and hopefully we're getting at least some stability from tax policy perspective. That's big. That's huge. The tariffs are that's a volatile situation.
Really up in the air. Ultimately what the Supreme Court decides is going to be a very big deal. Obviously we've got a Fed meeting going on right now. We'll get an announcement this week. Expectations, 90% probability that they're going to cut, and when the futures markets are that strong, generally the Fed does what the futures markets are expecting.
Yeah.
So I would be surprised if we don't get another rate cut. But look at the 10-year Treasury.
I'm just talking about that. Just talking about that. Yeah.
Right. And so, and this is the thing. So obviously, we're going to get a new Fed chair in May. Looks like it's going to be Hatchett. Who's definitely, very pro-administration.
Yep.
But the long end of the curve, right, the 10-year, is not controlled by the Fed unless they want to do a massive quantitative easing program, print money to buy interest rates down, which I don't think any of us would advocate for at this point in time. So ultimately, I think that I'm watching that 10-year Treasury, and I'm very intrigued to see that it's drifting back up here.
Yeah.
I think right now we're at 4.18%.
Yep.
So that's what really affects things like mortgage rates, right? So, obviously we want mortgage rates to come down to improve the housing affordability, but those mortgage rates aren't dipping down that much. I bought a house last year, and I did a bridge loan, kind of a 1-year loan with the bank because I had to sell my other house too, and I just signed the paperwork this morning. I got it down to 6, right, which was okay, but I was kind of hoping that maybe we'd get closer down to 5, and it hasn't happened yet. So today, if we're planning for next year, the number one thing that I would just encourage anybody to be thinking about is diversification, right? We're really starting to see a little bit more volatility here. We're questioning the return on investment of these big tech companies, right? We have to remember, 10% of the S&P 500, that's the largest 500 companies, 10% of that index is in 40% of that index is in 10 companies.
Yeah, 10 companies.
The most concentrated it's ever been.
Ever.
We're kind of questioning some of the investments and whether or not they're going to get the return on all of this capital expenditure that they're making towards artificial intelligence. You're seeing a lot of dollar weakness, surging returns in emerging markets, international. So I would just encourage people really to be thinking about diversification. Think about risk. What's worked for the last 2 or 3 years isn't necessarily what's going to carry things going forward. There's a lot of other very interesting opportunities in the markets right now.
Well, and let's talk about the macro picture in the economy a minute. Just some information that maybe the average person isn't aware of. But we did have a blowout Black Friday, but I don't think that was unexpected. But adjusted for inflation, it was pretty mediocre, right?
It was pretty.
1.7%, I think, is the latest data I saw.
Yeah. So, look, the consumer is okay right now. Credit card debts, auto delinquencies, but consumption is so. When we look at consumption in aggregate, it is so skewed towards the top end.
Yes.
Right. So there's a lot of people in this country who are doing really, really well, but there's more people who are looking at things and going, hey, it's not that good for me right now. I'm really struggling to keep up, to pay rent, to make my mortgage, to make those auto payments, right? And so, yes, overall consumption is good. It was, up 1.5% or so. That's fine.
Adjusted for inflation versus last year, 1.5% increase.
But it's like, we need more than that, right? To really say, hey, the consumer is robust. What I would say today is the consumer is okay because it's still being skewed by the top end of consumers.
Like 50%, a small percentage of consumers account for about 50% of total consumption. Last I looked, is that right?
Yeah, it's like to the top 10%.
Okay.
Is like well over half of consumption.
Yeah, and that's disturbing, but. I submit, get your reaction on this, I'll throw it out there, and we come back and talk about it on the other side of the break, that it's business CapEx that's driving GDP, right?
Oh, 100%.
And that is up 9% over last year, and about 95% is the AI industry.
Oh, that's where it is.
So all that, that's what's driving the economy right now. So we got Jeremy Nelson, the president of Element Wealth, in the Element Wealth studio. We're taking a break. We'll be right back.
From the Seabrook.
Attention, adoring fans!
It's time for Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Oh, that's an appropriate tune there, Will. We appreciate that. Okay, so we were just talking about GDP growth. So Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, is really out there pining about the GDP growth. And there's no question. We had, 3.8%, I think, last quarter. It's expected to be in that range this quarter. But you got to, as always, you know this, when you get those reports, you got to dig into the details and say, okay, what's driving this?
So Q2 was a bounce back from a negative Q1.
That's right.
And it was all had to do with imports, people trying to front load the imports before the tariffs came in. Okay?
Yep.
So what you're seeing right now is consumption that's it's okay, the consumer's okay, but it's not growing rapidly at this point in time. So, if you think of GDP, right, consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports, right?
Yep.
So the consumption side is like, okay, it's definitely not contracting, so that's good. Investment is where we're getting the big boom in GDP right now.
Right.
Now, the majority of that, like 95% or so, is in the AI build-out. Now, there's what the market is digesting right now is, are these companies actually going to get a return on the investment that they're putting into this? Because they're committing tens of billions of dollars every quarter to this AI build-out, right? Government spending, obviously, that's something where Doge was supposed to cut, so that's not a big boom right now. And then obviously net exports, the idea of the tariffs was to, reduce the trade deficit, right? Overall, though, if you pull out kind of the AI story and the build-out on investment, you've got a really flat economy right now.
In fact, one report, Jeremy, I saw indicated that since the pandemic, that the entire economy, except for AI and related industries, is flat.
Yeah.
Basically flat in 7 years, essentially, 6 years. But it's this AI revolution that's really driving all the GDP growth.
And what you're then seeing because of that is this discrepancy in what we see in the numbers as a whole and what the market's doing and what the average person is feeling.
Yeah.
Right. Now, look, if you've got money in the stock market and these top 10 companies, most of which are technology, are booming and doing well, you're looking at your portfolio, you're feeling pretty good.
Sure.
If you don't have it, and we've got this relatively flat economy, you're looking at it going, whoa, wait a minute, inflation has been hitting me. I'm not feeling like I'm moving at the pace. I feel like I'm falling behind, especially because housing costs have gone up so much. Although we're starting to see some better number on rents right now, so that's good. But it's a very interesting time. There's a lot of noise with the government shutdown. We haven't been getting all of the data, and so you just got conflicting data all over the place. The market as a whole is kind of hanging in there, betting that things are going to be good. But we've definitely seen a little bit of a slowdown here, right, over the past 6-7 weeks in the market where we're kind of moving into that show me phase right now. You're getting – I hate talking about cryptocurrency, but you're seeing a lot of volatility there. And, Tom Lee, who's always on CNBC, really smart guy, he talks about how cryptocurrency is kind of a leading indicator now. And so you're seeing a lot more volatility there. So that's why I just think people need to really, really be thinking about diversification right now.
Yeah, it's the old hedge your risk situation, right?
Yeah.
And don't be too concentrated in one area.
Yeah, look, and I think there's opportunities within the picks and shovels of the AI AI industry. I was actually just up in Manhattan. I was at Blackstone, the world's largest private equity manager. I was up there for meetings and got to sit down and listen to all of the teams that run infrastructure, real estate, private equity, private credit. It was very fascinating to see what they're seeing right now. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I don't think people should be too bearish, but you need to be diversified. I just don't see the continuation of the market with this level of concentration going for too much longer.
Yeah. And I think that's consistent with what most analysts are indicating as well. But it's hard to talk at a macro level when you look beneath the covers. Again, most of that's being driven by one segment of the economy.
It is, and that segment, their core businesses are highly profitable.
Yeah.
This new business that they're investing tens of billions of dollars into every year is not yet profitable.
Trillions, actually.
Yeah. Well, each of them individually.
Yeah.
And so that's the real challenge here, right? Is that you're seeing normal old school businesses they're doing okay, but they're not doing great. They're generally pretty cheap now, though. And then you got this one segment over here that's the shiny new thing, and it's like, hey, look what we're going to do. Look what we're going to do. Yet no one really has a formula yet for how we're actually going to make a return on this investment.
But they are profitable. We have to acknowledge that. This isn't like the .com deal where hopefully one day we're going to make a cash flow, produce a cash flow.
And that's why I don't like the comparisons to the .com bubble, because the difference here is this investment is coming out of their cash flow.
Yeah.
Now, we're paying a premium for these companies, right? And in order for them to continue their growth rates, this investment is going to have to pay off. If this investment isn't as profitable, the valuations will really come into question at a point in time. But they're doing it out of profits and cash flows. They're not loading up in a bunch of debt to do this.
That's right.
So I think that hey, this is the .com bubble is a false narrative. Are there shades of the hype? Are there some similarities? Yes, but do I expect that when this comes down, the NASDAQ goes down 80%? No, absolutely not.
So the CBO now is estimating. I was just telling you on the break, I'm waiting for the November Treasury report, and it's real simple. It's a series of documents, but the main one is here's how much money we took in, and here's how much we spent, and here's what the surplus or the deficit was. But the CBO does project those figures. They're estimating that we produced a $439 billion deficit for the first 2 fiscal months of fiscal year 26, with the federal government. October 1 launches the new year. Have a September 30th fiscal year end. So we've had 2 months, October, November, $439 billion. That means we're on a run rate extrapolating at about $2.5 billion, $1 trillion deficit.
Well,
trillion.
Look, you and I have talked about this for like 3 years off and on the show.
Yeah.
And if you want to know what my number one hot button is, it's the deficit, right? And right now, with that dollar weakening, interest rates coming down, there is less interest in foreigners buying our debt. And that means this deficit becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger issue. And part of this is why you're seeing, hey, the Fed's cutting rates, but the 10-year Treasury's going up.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And that's the pickle we're in. We under no administration have we done anything really about actually addressing this deficit. We're going back to 2000 since we've had a balanced budget. And as a fiscal conservative, that's the thing that drives me nuts, because eventually the piper has to be paid.
So I haven't said this on the show yet, but after I got this report just yesterday from the CBO, actually it was reported by, in my email, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget had someone from that organization on the show a couple of weeks ago talking about the trajectory of Social Security. But I started thinking about it, just doing the math, annualizing that figure. So we're less than a year away where our debt eclipses $40 trillion.
Yeah.
$40 trillion.
If right now, if you look at our debt to GDP ratio, we have surpassed where Greece was when they were collapsing in the early 2010s.
That's the concern.
Now, we're obviously a very different economy than Greece is, so I'm not saying we are Greece. But just for a reference point, we're just pushing that to that point, right, where I think we're getting to the limits of the ability to service this, because it's compounding on itself now. And that's the real challenge.
It's a concern for sure, and we keep talking about it on the other side of the break. But just for a little reminder to folks, at the end of fiscal year 2019, this was, of course, right before Mr. Trump was elected, or the election was held in 2020, I should say, and Joe Biden won. But at the end of that year, we were at $22.7 trillion. 22.7. Now we're approaching 40.
It's eye-opening.
6 years. We go from 22 to 40. Unbelievable. Jeremy Nelson, the president of Element Wealth, is in the Element Wealth studio. Another segment is next.
For all your glass.
Come on.
Come on. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
All right, we are back
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays in the Element Wealth studio, visiting with the president of Element Wealth, Jeremy Nelson. So, all right, so we've talked about the macro economy and how that might affect people. So I do feel like that there are some effects of the Working Families Tax Act, a.k.a. the One Big Beautiful Bill, that they lag in terms of their impact. Certainly, I've said on this show that probably the provision that will have more positive impact on the economy than either really are the business provisions, not the individual provisions, specifically the immediate expensing, because that was being phased out and had been cut down to 50%. That was the only way the Republicans could pass that in 2017 to get within the reconciliation parameters. But now that's been restored. Mm-hmm. I think that'll have a bigger impact. So what we're seeing in terms of GDP growth is mainly business capex taking advantage of that provision. Your thought? Absolutely.
So the biggest benefactors of the bill are businesses. Now let's think about if you're a retiree, right? So next year you're going to get this $6,000 per person additional deduction.
Standard deduction.
Right.
Increased.
So, you're going to go from $15,000 to $21,000. So that's going to save you, call it $1,000 to $1,500.
I think it's more like $300.
Yeah.
I think the average effective rate's probably more in the 20% range.
But if you have money in the bank and CDs, the rates are getting cut, right, aggressively because we want these lower rates. Well, you're going to lose more in interest than you're going to gain in the tax deduction, right? So net, like if you're a retiree, outside of, hey, maybe it supports the market and your investment portfolio, it's like, okay, it's not really doing a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of a wash at the end of the day. The individual provisions.
I looked at for myself next year, and I was like, increasing the SALT, the state and local tax, that's going to help me out.
Me too.
A little bit there. But it's nothing really changed for me outside of that. And then for really high-income earners, that gets phased out anyway.
That's right.
So there's a lot of different phase-outs. So for the individual, the provisions within the bill are kind of, I would say, overall net neutral. Right?
Yeah.
But where the biggest benefits come is for businesses. So as investors, right, we like that. It's good for us.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The deductibility, it's not an exemption, but the deductibility of tip income for certain qualified taxpayers, and then the premium portion on overtime, that's one of the most confusing things to people that think all of their overtime is deductible. It's not. Only the premium portion.
That extra 50 cents an hour, or whatever it is.
Right, that you earn when you're working in an overtime situation. And the other thing is these things have a sunset provision on them as well.
Yeah, so, they're not long-lasting.
28 for tips and the increase in the senior standard deduction and overtime, and then the SALT, I think, is 2030 is when it expires. So it's not permanent. So you get essentially 3 years of it.
So you're going to get a little bit here for a little while, and then it's going to go back to what it was.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I think that this is when we talk with clients about long-term tax planning or younger people. Hey, should you do Roth contributions or pre-tax contributions to your 401k? We're just saying, hey, look. I don't think that the tax environment's going to get better. We just talked about pushing $40 trillion in debt. Right? So, I mean, logically speaking, do we think that tax rates are going to get better or worse in the future? Well, even if I don't think that they get better than they are, they probably end up getting worse, right? So, take advantage of everything while you can today at these lower rates, because if we get to a point in the future where we actually start addressing these things, and eventually we will be forced to address these things, then the piper's going to get paid. It's going to get a little more expensive.
Yeah. Now, so something else, and we're not giving tax advice here. I want to be clear on that. We're not licensed tax advisors. We got to give that disclaimer. But this overtime and tips thing is, and even the SALT deduction, those are deductions, not exemptions. So that's not going to be reflected in your payroll, for example.
Correct.
You have to make some adjustments with your HR department, whoever administers your payroll internally, not the payroll people, payroll system provider. Your HR, your payroll administrator, and your company would have to deal with it on your behalf. But if you want to get that benefit now in your pay, you'd have to make some adjustments. It's not going to happen automatically because it's a deduction, not an exemption.
Yes, exactly. And then I would also just point out, like cash tips, how many people were really claiming them anyway?
Exactly. I'm just not sure that the impact is quite what it's projected to be. And there's a really tiny percentage of people in this country that work overtime. I mean, it's kind of a good thing. We've figured out a way to get more work done in less time, so we don't have a lot of overtime situations.
Again, it's not hurting anyone. It's a little better.
Yes,
but the boom is on the corporate side.
I don't. That's right. I think that's where, and what we hope is that produces higher GDP, so that ratio of debt to GDP stays somewhat reasonable, but it's getting out of control.
We got to see that deficit coming down. Very important.
Jeremy Nelson, the president of Element Wealth, has been our guest in the Element Wealth studio. It's top of the hour. That means Fox News, SuperTalk News, and after that, it's Andrea Hickerson, dean of the School of Journalism at Ole Miss. Stay with us. Of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
And now, another hour of the talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Begin your transition now.
Now on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays, live from the Element Wealth studio. We're pleased to welcome now Andrea Hickerson, a dean of the School of Journalism and New Media, professor of journalism, and director of the Center for Information Advantage and Effectiveness. Andrea, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, did I get it right? Your name, your first name, is it Andrea or Andrea?
Yes, you did.
Okay, great. All right, well,
Andrea.
Got you. Great, perfect. So pleased to have you. I checked out this piece that you did about the influence of artificial intelligence on elections. Of course, artificial intelligence, extremely powerful, as we all know, and we're trying to figure out how to make sure that we can regulate it. I mean, this is the challenge that governments are facing at all levels. How do we regulate it, but in a way that doesn't impede innovation? And when you think about the possibility of AI interfering with our elections, as if we don't have enough problems already making sure that we have true and fair and accurate elections, this just kind of ratchets up our concerns even more. What can you tell us about your research here?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. Excited to talk about this topic. I've been working on AI in journalism since 2018. So before it was part of kind of our common vocabulary. What I think we're most concerned about with use of AI in elections is, one, we assume that it's going to happen, that it happens already, even if we're using social media, right? That's AI built into your recommender system, showing us what we see.
Yeah.
And so looking beyond that, how can we use AI responsibly in elections and ethically in elections? So we're starting with kind of the ethics piece of that and working out towards what regulations could look like. But the regulation piece is really hard. There's not been an appetite for that for the past few years, and I don't think that'll change. Yeah.
Well, I think that the states in particular, since elections are, as you know, administered at the state level, and then, of course, that flows down to the local level, typically the county level, this is just something else they got to deal with, right? They need to incorporate into their planning, into their systems, their policies, their regulatory framework, and of course, they're limited about law. Our Secretary of State, for example, in the state of Mississippi, cannot act outside of law, so anything that might be required with respect to this potential risk of AI interfering with our elections would require some legal changes and some new measures to be enacted.
Absolutely. And I also want to highlight the positive uses of AI for elections. So,
sure.
For example, it can be very difficult for people to figure out where there are election polling places or whether or not it's handicap accessible. And you can use AI to scrape websites in local municipalities to give local citizens information about where they vote, what hours are open. So there's really good uses of AI that are out there. And even what I'm suggesting, I think is relatively simple, but quite difficult to do because the back ends of these local election websites are not fully developed. And not only that, I tried to do a study on this locally in Mississippi, and people were reluctant to trust information that they were getting, even though it was coming directly from the sources that were saying, this is when our polling site is open. We tried to do a study with some senior citizens where we would use an Alexa device so they could say, Alexa, when is my polling place open? Is it accessible for me? And, we thought this would be great because we're getting information from state officials, but we heard a reluctance from some people to trust anything that was even coming through an electronic device. So the potential is there, right? That's an accessibility issue. But there's still a bit of reluctance there. So when we think about AI in elections, and not just the actual voting process,
sure.
It's the information. It's making people feel comfortable with it. But then also the backside of that too is telling people how their data is going to be used, who's processing it, who has access to it. And I think, we have to do a lot of education of citizens to what are their expectations, what do they want to know about elections, and also of our local officials.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. And people just naturally what they want to make sure of is that their ballot can be cast and that it is accounted for throughout the process. The audit trail, the breadcrumbs, we used to call it in the IT industry, the breadcrumbs of the flow of that ballot all the way to when it's officially recorded and considered in the election. People just want to know and be comfortable and confident that it's being handled accurately and appropriately.
Absolutely. And I've seen some large cities like Los Angeles, for example, they have a lot of election security people built in. So they're looking at real-time live social media coming in to see if there's any risks there. So that way they can communicate with the public right away if there's any misinformation about the use of AI in elections as well.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So you're probably aware that the Secretary of State in Mississippi here has a Y'all Vote tool on their website that allows one to input their address and find out where they're supposed to vote. So how do you see perhaps AI enhancing that? You talked about that a minute ago, just using AI to just figure out when are the polls open, where do I vote, what are the elections going on, and so forth. How would it enhance that?
I think one thing that AI can do is it can distribute information across different devices. So not everybody's going to go to the website to find it, right? They might use an Alexa type device, or they might ask a friend, or it might be a news organization that's using the AI from that website to plug into their website as well. So I think that, also I think what we need to find out is what information do people want about elections. We make a lot of assumptions about what types of information people want, but I think we can use AI to figure out more what they want and also give them, more information about when to expect results, other information that's been vetted. And I think it's important to distinguish what's official information in the context of elections and what's produced by non-official sources.
Okay. So how do we make sure that the AI is not biased in some way? So maybe it helps, it figures out who's asking the question, and it gives false information based on their voting history, as an example.
Right. So that's a great question. And I'm a huge believer of the human in the loop use of AI, is that you need a human there assessing and explaining what the AI algorithm is. And being in the School of Journalism and New Media, where we've got a lot of public communicators, I think this is my soapbox issue, is that I need to have graduates that can explain to the public what AI is and how people's information is being used in AI. So I think when it comes to elections, we need to tell people where the sources of data are. So for example, is it coming from the Secretary of State's website? When was the last time it was updated? We need to tell people all of that type of information as opposed to coming from sites that may be biased. But that's not even accounting for the technical bias in the tool itself, which absolutely can exist, right? Yeah. AI is really great at some things and incredibly terrible at other things. And so I think what we need to do is, and anything of AI, is we need to share the risk and the uncertainty with the public about it, right? It's all probabilities, right?
Sure.
And so I think we need to do a better job explaining that to the public so they can be more informed, that they don't think that this is just an actual fact. It's math, right? It's just a statistical probability.
Yeah. So looking in the crystal ball, Andrea, where do you see perhaps other use cases and applications of AI in elections, in the election process?
Oh, I think a lot of it is going to be in information space. I think, it's already being used, right? And if we think about social media and using particular social media platforms, a lot of those are primed to, incentivize, if you will, kind of incendiary or emotional remarks for people. So it's already being used in that context. And so I think, we can use AI for fact checking, for example, if it's factual claims. But even that, we need to tell people how we're checking it. Is it based on Wikipedia? Is it based on academic research? And a lot of the AI fact checking tools are not really developed about that. Endless uses of it, right? I'm more concerned about the misuse of it in the information space than I am of effective uses of it. And unfortunately, I think because there are so many easy cases of misinformation in the election space, in the information space, it's hard to get people excited about positive uses because they're so focused on the risk.
The president just announced that he's going to be putting forth some, I think, an executive order, if I'm not mistaken, that would essentially rely on the federal government to establish the regulatory framework for AI and would really limit the states. And he says that's necessary because we don't need 50 different sets of policies, which is quite possible. We got a break right here, but if you can hang on, we can keep talking about that. Just remember that question when we come back.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep. Andrea Hickerson from Ole Miss, the Dean of the School of Journalism in New Media, is our guest. We're coming right back.
By every metric. And now, the talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
Now, on to the real part.
Dynamite! On SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Well studio. Our guest is Andrea Hickerson, Dean of the School of Journalism and New Media and a professor of journalism at the University of Mississippi. So, Professor, this announcement by the president just a couple of days ago, and of course he generally likes to communicate through his Truth Social media platform, and that's really the first place we saw it and heard it. It's been discussed. It wasn't anything new that just came out of thin air. That in fact, we even had Senator Ted Cruz. He pushed to incorporate legislation or a provision, I should say, in the Big Beautiful Bill Act legislation that would in fact prohibit states from implementing and promulgating any sort of AI regulation. It at the end of the day, didn't make its way into the final bill, but now the president says, yeah, and I think this is really stemming from what he's hearing from a lot of the leaders of the products and services in the AI industry that are saying we can't possibly make chips even that could comply to 50 different sets of rules, which is, of course, a risk. And the president comes out and says, we need one rule book, was the term he used. I kind of have mixed feelings about that, honestly. I get it that we need some maybe high-level framework at the federal level, but I think the states ought to also have the ability to implement more specific guidelines that they feel are related and more aligned with the values of their states. And, in fact, we have an AI regulatory task force right here in Mississippi that was set up. I'm on it, just set up. We haven't even written any rules yet. We're still in the fact-finding and investigative phase right now, having heard from lots of experts. We have another meeting next week to do so, and then one more, and then we're going to try to turn over something to the legislature. But your thoughts about just how this stuff is moving much faster than government can regulate?
Yes, I think you raised some really excellent points. I mean, the three things that I would want to understand about a national AI policy would be trust. What kind of trust do citizens from Mississippi or elsewhere have that the federal government can effectively do this? Related to that, too, issues of privacy, right? How am I protecting my community's values, and how will that be used? Again, do I trust that I will be adequately represented? And then the third thing I throw in there, too, is innovation. I mean, back to the comment that you made is that there's a lot of large companies that are definitely backing this, right? Are we getting too close with certain companies that we will drive out really innovative other ways of doing things if we commit to a very particular structure of things? So any AI legislation or AI tool is really designed, with a company in mind, right? And we don't always know how they're built, right? Which is another question too. And so we're putting a lot of faith in the federal government to do this. And I don't know that local communities, that states are ready to commit to that yet.
Yeah, and there's always the risk. I mean, I encountered this throughout my entire business career in the IT industry, that government often may ask for something that's not possible. So you may do an RFP with specifications, say, well, that's great, except nobody can do that. That's not possible. And you can run into the same situation here, probably even more likely with AI, because it is not fully understood yet. We don't totally know what the capabilities are or what sort of life of its own it may take as we feed it information and train the large language models, and then it composes all that into some sort of generative response. We don't actually know, and so that's a huge risk. But somehow consumers have to have confidence. Tell me, how is that working out in the journalism industry? Because man, today we have so many different media outlets, so many journalistic paths, I guess, to the consumers. How do you discern between the fact and the fiction, first of all, and then secondly, well, is that something that came from AI? Is that legitimate from the journalism source?
Right. For me, the big issue is trust, right? I don't have an issue with journalism organizations using AI or LLMs if they're transparent with their audience about how they're using it, right? Gathering sports scores, gathering financial information, that's kind of old hat right now. If it's, pulling national news stories, that could be done. Writing headlines, maybe. But again, it's all about that relationship you have. The problem is that the public and journalists themselves are not really well versed in looking for misinformation and factual errors, right? And so we have a bias towards automation. Well, if this tool tells me it's correct and this LLM said that, it must be correct.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we absolve ourselves from responsibility when we pass it off to tools that way. So the area that I've been the most involved with is deepfake videos. So I've been working with a team to create a deepfake detector that is specifically for journalists. And the reason we chose to do it just for journalists, because even if a tool is effective and it becomes discredited, people won't use it. So we have our group of academics, we're not associated with a company, that have made this for journalists. And deepfakes are tricky because you can't tell just by looking at it. So in that sense, AI can be very helpful, But a good journalist is going to have a lot of contextual cues and say, well, that's not really something that CEO of that company would say. And AI is not going to tell you that. It's just going to give you the probability. And that can be hard for journalists that are used to going in black and white. And that's okay. But again, we need to be able to communicate that to the audience and be transparent about our process.
So I'm thinking maybe, Andrea, that we'll literally have to regulate technology with technology. I can see a time where we'll have AI technology whose purpose is to detect false AI or false information or biased information being generated by AI.
Absolutely. I mean, people are already experimenting with that. We've had one of the models we're using to detect deepfakes is to see if there's a mistake in the deepfake model, right? Because we know that these things hallucinate and see things that aren't there. So again, that's where it's that risk. And yes, it's very tempting to say it's the tool's fault, but that doesn't help the public, right? If we're trying to gain trust in our profession, it's not good enough just to say, oops.
So, Andrea, just curious about the academic impact of this, because most of the use of AI today is the generative, the GPT type AI, although businesses and companies, as you know, are implementing agentic AI in a big way, which is actually more valuable in a business setting. But to the typical consumer, it's generative. I give you a prompt, you send me something back. Right. Journalism is a generative endeavor, if you think about it. It's kind of out of your head. It's a creative endeavor that requires some research and fact finding. Typically, sometimes it doesn't. If it's an opinion, maybe that's just completely out of one's brain. What are you having to do in the classroom to incorporate AI? Just to instruct students on how to use it, how to be aware of it, how to apply it, what to be concerned about.
The biggest challenge we have is that students are already using AI and the faculty are behind the students. So they have already worked it into their workflows from high school or whatever, and they might not be using it in a mature way, right? And so I think what we're struggling with as educators is how do we instruct students about okay uses of AI and not okay uses of AI. Okay. And people have different levels of comfortability with that. But it really varies. But what we're seeing too is a bit of a backlash from students as well. So there's been a number of cases across the U.S. where universities have used AI generated art and students have started petitions because they hate it, right? So we're not having really in-depth conversations. They're very episodic situations about AI, but I think the challenge is more systemic to higher education. Higher education doesn't move very quickly, but advances in AI have moved very, very quickly. So we're playing a bit of catch-up and having to do co-education. Yeah,
and it's a great point. And of course, that is also consistent somewhat with government because, let's be honest, the institutions of higher learning have multiple layers. They can kind of adopt a bureaucratic bent to them. That's not unusual. That's been around a while. But man, the industry, the technology is moving at warp speed, and it's kind of hard to keep up and ensure that you guys are current in your educational pedagogy.
Absolutely. It's a big challenge, but I think it's also an opportunity, right? I believe that journalism is a great generalist degree, right? You learn how to read, you learn how to write, you learn how to interview people, and that is what you need to be successful in any career. So I know people are worried about AI, people are worried about journalism, but I think it's the future.
It's a great point. Before we go here, I read a report, I think it was in the Harvard Business Review, that said that the key to success more than anything else is effective communication skills. The people who have effective communication, and that's really what you guys teach in the School of Journalism.
Absolutely, we try.
But if you have some sort of technical aptitude and you can also combine that and fuse that with effective communication skills, grand slam, right? Not home run, grand slam in that particular case. Yeah. Enjoy talking to you. Yep, Andrea Hickerson from Ole Miss.
Thank you very much.
Yep, the Dean of the School of Journalism and New Media. Enjoy the conversation, Andrea. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
We're coming right back in the Element Well studio.
From the Seabrook.com.
Middays with Gerard Gibert. It is on SuperTalk Mississippi.
There she stood in the street, smiling from her head to her feet. I said, what is this now, baby? Maybe she's in need of a kiss. I said, hey, what's your name?
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Well studio. So, talking about AI, report this morning, Will, about AI gaining ground in the housing industry. Incredible. Use of AI to construct houses, including robots doing framing and some of the other manual construction tasks. Fascinating watching this unfold. Expected to moderate the increase in housing costs because there's a labor shortage. There's a manual labor shortage of construction workers to build houses. And so companies are, the larger home builders, not so much the smaller ones at this point. It's a little prohibitive for them to make such an investment. But a lot of the big ones are investing in AI and robotics to be part of the home building process. Fascinating watching that. You wouldn't think you would be able to construct a robot that could actually frame a house, but it's really incredible.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah, what's going on there. So I would always say, never say never on stuff like that. There's unbelievable the ability for humans to innovate and invent and address human problems. It's the only way you can solve them is with human innovation, and that's exactly what's going on now. They're building walls, they're doing floors, roofing, unbelievable technology. So the Mississippi Democratic Party yesterday issued a press release highlighting that Mississippi is now in a recession or close, so close that experts are sounding the alarm. There have been some recent reports, and of course, recession generally defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, and Mississippi is certainly possibly going to see that happen, 2 consecutive quarters. But right now, I'd say it's 50-50 at best. And, of course, they're trashing the governor and Republicans about it, and they get into some details. And they go after the multi-billion-dollar data centers. These are just big buildings that eat up land, strain local utilities, and hire very few people once the construction ends. In some cases, less than 100 permanent jobs. That's not growth. That's a mirage. Guess what, you fools? Every keystroke you typed there flowed through multiple data centers. If you don't like data centers, get off the internet, Democratic Party. Your use of these tools necessitates more data centers. I don't know why people don't get that. They use data centers to complain about data centers. That's essentially what you're doing here. If you wanted to explain why there's this massive growth in data centers, it's because we're consuming the services they provide. And there's an incredible increase in that. Most people couldn't imagine life without all those electronic tools. I'm not saying that necessarily be a bad thing. Some people, I know somebody on my text line has texted before and said, I don't have mobile phones. That's fine. There are more mobile phones, by the way, in the world than people. That's a fact. There are more than there are electricity outlets as well, because we've got a lot of countries that don't have ubiquitous electrical grid like we enjoy here in this country. We don't think about, well, are we going to plug that in? There's obviously electricity is abundant. But here's something else they're not considering. In the county of Madison, which is where the big AWS project is going in, that county's bifurcated from a political perspective. You got the north that's Democrat, the south that's largely Republican, leans Republican, and has the the nod there over Democrats. But guess what? It's the northern part of the county and that Democrat stronghold in Canton, a not so well performing public school district, that will receive unbelievable amounts of money from this data center investment. So they always talk about, we don't have enough money going into education, right? They want more money into education. Let's don't do school choice. We got to just send more money and fully fund education. The Canton Public School District is going to get more than enough money on an annual basis in terms of ad valorem taxes paid by Amazon to build a new high school every year and not miss a dime. They could literally build a new high school every year just from that money. But yet, these guys are smearing that. This is going to give the Canton Public School District literally more money than they're going to know what to do with. And that's, by the way, with a discount on the property taxes. So, in the 100 permanent jobs, I need to remind folks, if they don't hire at least 1,000 people, making an average wage of $66K, the various incentives, such as the discount on property taxes, they lose it. The sales tax abatement during the construction period, they lose it. The no corporate income taxes, they lose it. Why don't the Democrats talk about that in an honest fashion? Don't answer that, I already know. Because they can say this, just like Andrea was saying. Oh, wow, I read it on the internet on the Mississippi Democratic Party site. You know it's got to be 100% accurate. So, maybe we're not happy about 1,000 jobs. I honestly think it's going to be more like 1,200. And I also think the average pay is going to be closer to six figures than $66K. This is just disingenuous, what they're saying. So they say what we need is Mississippi leaders. Mississippi deserves leaders who believe in real economic development, the kind that puts people first. Investing in local small businesses. What does that mean? Just the state government sends money to businesses? Supporting good paying and clean, I think they meant to say and, it says in clean energy and manufacturing. Okay, what does that mean? What supporting that? What should the government do to support that? How about just get out of the way? Expanding access to health care and education. You know what that means in their world? That means Medicaid expansion and the state government sending more money to the public schools, including those that are failing, rebuilding infrastructure that actually serves our communities. Well, of course, we just, to the chagrin of many, in our audience, we just increased the fuel tax for that very purpose. We passed a lottery 6 years ago to send $80 million a year to infrastructure. And we got money coming down for the federal government that matches up with state money. The state of Mississippi, this is literally written checks to transfer over to the Department of Transportation so they can go tap federal money to improve the infrastructure in the state. So I just want to point out that there are...
How many times do the people that complain about roads, they're complaining because the road system in their local town is terrible?
Which has nothing to do with the state.
Potholes everywhere. I was driving through a Democrat-controlled town the other day, and the roads were terrible.
Right.
And I think my wife said, I wish the department... I said, they don't have anything to do with this.
Yep, that's right. Those are managed by, and you know this, Will, we just had Mayor Paul Janish of Cleveland on the show last Thursday when we did the 50 Nights of Lights remote. And we've interviewed numerous mayors. It's what they talk about. It's the number one issue. Because that's what city's number one priority and responsibility is that physical infrastructure. Because they're responsible for the roads, the bridges, the traffic systems, and also the water systems in most municipalities. Those are expensive to maintain. They get a combination of property taxes, ad valorem taxes, and a diversion from state sales taxes. That's their source of funding to pay for all that. But, yeah, it's their responsibility. This is not incumbent upon the state. I guess what they want, which happens a lot, is, you get the Christmas tree bill at the end of the session, which didn't happen last year because of the way that whole thing unfolded with the tax reform bill and the contention that you could cut with a knife between the House and the Senate. And remember, they had to come back and do a budget, but didn't do a special projects bill. And that's where a lot of these cities and counties get that extra money the state just hands that down. But that's going to get even more difficult to implement and to provide, because we got this PERS thing staring us in the face, and we're also eliminating the income tax. I think you can expect to see in the next few years our revenues start to decline as a result of that, which means we're going to have to tighten the belt from a spending perspective. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Up a
You know what that means.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
We'll do it live
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
'Too many teardrops for one heart to be crying. Too many teardrops for one heart to carry on. You're way on top now since you left me. You're always laughing way down at me. But watch out now.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth studio. The Mysterians, 1966.
Question mark in the Mysterians.
That's right, the question mark. I forgot about that. Yeah,
they were one of the first kind of big one-hit wonders.
Yeah, you're right.
They were weird. It's a great song.
It is a great song.
But yeah, they were one-hit wonders. 96 Tears. Never. I mean, I'd give you $1 if you could name another song by them without looking it up. You can't.
My brother, who was in the Air Force, this song, by the way, 1966 is when it was released, and that's when my brother enlisted in the Air Force, U.S. Air Force. And, of course, I was young at the time, and I want to say that he had shared with my parents that somehow he met the lead singer. Yeah. Of that tune. It's part of his Air Force experience.
The lead singer was known as Question Mark.
Yeah, no, Question Mark. Yeah, literally, Question Mark and the Mysterians. I wonder if that was kind of a takeoff from the Riddler and Batman,
Maybe so.
It was popular during that period. That was pretty cool. Oh, man. So, Ray in Long Beach, by the way, said his 401k plan, he's up 14.6% year-to-date, 13% over last year. I want to retire in 5 to 6 years. This is when Jeremy was on with us. Should those percentages be higher? Actually, you're outpacing the returns in the markets, the aggregate returns. So I told Ray, I think you're doing pretty good there. Congratulations. Here's a question on the C Spire text lines. If the tax rates are only going to get worse because of the federal deficit, what is this notion of eliminating the federal income tax? I'm not sure what's meant by if the tax rates are only going to get, might mean if the tax revenue is going to get worse because of the Fed. So it's the opposite. The less tax revenue we take in without curbing spending, then the deficit increases. So here's the thing, that the revenue is actually increasing. The spending's just increasing at a greater clip, at a greater rate. And that's why the deficit continues to increase. And this is the argument that is easy to use to refute the Democrats' contention that it was the Trump tax cuts that created all the deficits and added to the debt. Wrong. after the Trump tax cuts, revenues actually increased by about a third from 17 when that happened in the ensuing years. The problem is the spending went up by 55%. So you would think, wow, if I could increase my income by a third, I ought to be able to put a little to the bottom line there with that. But no, the spending, and that's largely driven by Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all the other benefits, military spending up as well, but it's those big ones, and of course debt interest, which is just a never-ending spiral, now becoming the second biggest spending line item in the budget, debt interest, eclipsing $1 trillion. That's right behind Social Security, which is $1.6 trillion, and then defense is sitting at about $800 billion, Medicare $900 billion, Medicaid $620 billion. Those are kind of the big spending categories with the federal government. On the C Spire text line, so at what point do our elected officials create a budget not balanced but with a level of surplus? Never. I don't think you'll see a balanced budget. I don't think you'll see a surplus again ever. And the only way we're going to achieve that, you could certainly say let's cut spending. And I know someone said, I'm looking for it now, we should not send any money to other countries. I know this is a popular one, and I get it. It's more emotional than it is really financial or mathematic. But I think it's the optics of it. People don't like the idea that, wait, we're running deficits here and incrementing our debt, but we're sending money overseas. That makes no sense. I agree. But just so you'll know, of the $7 trillion of spending last year, $34 billion went to foreign countries, and about half of that went to Ukraine. You can do the math there. That's 0.5%. Doesn't even get to 1%. So I'm all for that, but okay, where's the other $2 trillion coming from? If we want to be serious about rectifying this financial problem we have, and this is all because I mentioned earlier that the CBO projects $439 billion of new debt for the first 2 months of the fiscal year for the federal government. Fox News, SuperTalk News next with the Allman Brothers bumping us out. We're in the Element Wealth studio.
And now, the talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
That's what I like to listen to.
You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Winter is here again, oh Lord. I've been home in a year or more. I hope she holds on a little longer. Send a letter on a long summer day.
Welcome back, everyone. It is hour 3 of Middays, live from the Element Wealth studio. Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income growth and guarantees. So, on the C Spire text line, again, no money should leave the borders for any reason as long as the federal government is in debt. I don't think we'll be out of debt anytime soon. I think it would be received very well if the federal government would end all federal aid. I've actually said, Will, that with all the corruption we see in the abuse of federal dollars and to some extent state dollars we see here at home, that it is just strewn throughout grant programs. Maybe you ought to just end all federal grants. I mean, it just seems like that in many cases they do more harm than good, and they waste money more than they produce value for society. And I know there's a lot of folks out there that honestly rely on their livelihoods for these grants. A lot go to higher ed, for example, for research and development. But man, we just don't seem to be able to control all the misspending and the abuse and the fraud that occurs. We're watching this huge case. It's Medicaid up in Minnesota, and that money is being filtered down through all sorts of non-government organizations and making its way even down to terrorist organizations in Somalia. That's just insane that our money is being spent that way. So maybe it's time why don't we just terminate all grants and start over? If there appears to be some legitimate need and you can absolutely identify and ascertain that there would be value produced, return on these grants for the taxpayer, okay, then we authorize them. But we shouldn't do that until we modernize. I've talked about this a lot in the last week on the show. The systems we use to control that money. The fact that Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins has reported here and highlighting the last couple of weeks that we got all these states that are misusing SNAP funds. That we're finding from the states that did supply the requested information to the USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins. She did request all 50 states send us your SNAP rolls, and within a couple of days they run some queries, electronic queries, software created queries against these rolls and say, wait, you got all these people who show as deceased. I still don't get that. I've talked about it extensively on the show. These are pretty simple programming problems to address. Why in the world do we have systems in the states that don't seem to have fully integrated capability to determine that, hey, this is really a person that's living and breathing before we send them SNAP cards? And that's what they found out. And then there are folks who are applying in multiple states, and the cards are going out to multiple people. We found that in the ACA, Obamacare exchanges and marketplaces uncovered all kinds of fraud and erroneous data there where I think it was the CBO, if I'm not mistaken, had created some fictitious Social Security numbers and submitted those, applied for premium tax credits to buy insurance, and it approved them all, even though they're fictitious, and some are used multiple times in multiple states, and these payments are going to the insurance companies. So these are systems problems. All of this needs to be addressed by modernizing and tightening the really weak, poor control mechanisms we have in our systems to ensure that money only goes to people or organizations who are eligible and in full compliance with our laws. This is not something we're going to solve by hiring a bunch more people.
Yeah,
it's impossible. And I do think this is a case where artificial intelligence could also be employed to handle a lot of that vetting and eligibility process checking to make sure that we're not wasting money. But this is not shocking to me. It's been going on for decades because we have poorly designed systems. The earned income tax credit is one where all these breaches of various companies that store our Social Security numbers, the credit bureaus are the one that most people think about. Remember, there was a huge Equifax breach 10 years or so ago. And every Social Security number in America got captured by these nefarious actors. And then they turn around and use them to file bogus tax returns that indicate an earned income tax credit is due, and the IRS sends them money. Last I checked, about $8 billion a year. Just think about that. That's a quarter of foreign aid. $8 billion a year, and most of them are not even in this country that IRS is sending money to because of the terrible systems.
Yeah. I think that too, and Gerard, there's no incentive to fix a lot of this stuff.
Totally true. Totally true.
If in a business, if you're leaking money like that and you go and fix it, there's a pat on the back and a promotion probably for you. And I don't know if the federal government has that.
Well, because there's no consequences.
There's no consequences.
You just print money.
You and I were talking about something going on where there's little factions inside of a department, that are warring with each other.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens probably to some degree in some businesses, but for the most part, no.
You couldn't do that in business. It's the faceless bureaucrats. Now, the good news is the Supreme Court seems poised to rule in the president's favor. It's amazing to me we even have to take this to the Supreme Court. That would allow him to terminate people that work in the executive branch.
That's enough. I mean, that to me is crazy.
I agree.
You're the CEO of the company, and are there people that you can fire? Yeah, you can fire anybody.
Seems like that's the way it ought to work. And so they heard arguments yesterday on whether Congress could limit the president's ability to fire members, in this case specifically the Federal Trade Commission, where he fired some folks earlier this year. But this would affect a long list of other agencies in the executive branch. And the problem is they can just act with impunity. It's these faceless bureaucrats that have these permanent jobs. You can't get rid of them. We need term limits on the faceless bureaucrats in the agencies. They affect our lives more than the people in Congress. At least we get to vote for them. We don't get to vote for these people. We vote for a president that we expect would fill the organization chart out with people that are aligned with the president. And he should have the ability to do so. And that's what's being argued at the Supreme Court. But it does look like, all indications are, the court's going to rule in favor of the president. In which case, I think you're going to see a domino effect of a lot of people that have just been hiding out in these cushy jobs, either not doing squat or pushing a political agenda, as opposed to executing the discharge function of the agency. So I think this is good news, and I'm optimistic that the Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of the president here. So some of the justices worry about government structure, and that's understandable. But I tell you, if the Supreme Court rules this way, watch a lot of heads roll throughout government. I think that's a good thing. And again, if you don't like it, well then elect a different president that will appoint people in the executive branch that you're happy with. But it shouldn't be a situation where the court says, no, the president as the chief executive officer of the country can't do that. I just don't think that's consistent with our Constitution, which is what's to be used to guide, of course, the Supreme Court in their decision-making. You may have also seen that the president weighed in and said that he doesn't want Justice Thomas or Alito, I think it was, to resign. I didn't even know that was going on, but apparently there's some Republican members of Congress that are hoping they just retire so the president can appoint somebody different. But the president, I got to check that out on the break, make sure I got that right. But I caught that early this morning that he came out and said, no, he's happy with them in place. I think that's because he don't want to get sideways with them as they make some of these critical decisions, especially about tariffs and the constitutionality of that. Coming right back in the Element Well studio.
Check it out. Let's do this. The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's get on with it.
On SuperTalk Mississippi.
Mick Jagger and the Stones, Give Me Shelter. I think that was from the Hot Rocks album, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't remember. That's one of my favorites, though.
It's a good tune. I like Honky Tonk Woman as well.
Honky Tonk Woman's one of the best.
Yeah.
There's actually a second version of Honky Tonk Woman called Country Tonk Woman.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Instead of saying, I think in that song he says Memphis.
Okay.
But in Country Tonk he says Jackson, Mississippi.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Appreciate that. It was from the album Let It Bleed, 1969. Let It Bleed. So, on the C Spire text line, a little background. I said that with all the in a segment earlier, with all the corruption we see in all these federal grant programs, that there's scam artists that just specialize in trying to figure out how to take down federal money and to some extent state money as well, where state grants are in play. And it's a matter of working the system more than anything else to receive those grants. And on the C Spire text line, I'm a volunteer firefighter, and we rely on FEMA grants on fire equipment. If it weren't for them, we would have a hard time making it. So I want to be clear. It's not that I'm opposed to what the grants are used for. I'm opposed to the systems and the process. And so I don't want this volunteer firefighter to do without the fire equipment they need to fight fires, extinguish fires, and serve the public. The question is, should they be paid for and funded by federal grants? Because keep this in mind, 46 cents of every dollar that we send out from the Treasury is borrowed. We're literally borrowing money to buy fire equipment and racking up debt. I'm not saying that we don't need the fire equipment. We do. I agree. And I certainly don't want the great folks who are volunteer firefighters, and by the way, appreciate you doing that. I don't want you to do without that equipment. I get it. It's totally necessary. It's what should be the source of funding. Why will the state pay for that? Why are we getting federal grants for that? Look, if the federal government balanced its budget, would you agree that across Mississippi, that's a fairly high priority? You hear Mississippians talk about that. They're mad about the overspending. They're mad about the deficits. They're mad about the debt. Do you not hear that?
Absolutely.
Regular basis. Okay, well, think about this. Just the math. I'm just a math messenger here. If we balanced the federal budget not by raising taxes and increasing revenue, which I don't think it would increase revenue if you raise taxes. That's where the Democrats are wrong. But by cutting spending. That means that stuff like these FEMA grants goes away. We don't have any money for it. You'd have to cut every bit of that. Here's my point. If we cut spending sufficient to balance the budget without touching Social Security and Medicare, without touching those two programs, because I would say that's a non-starter for most people in this country. Let's say we balance the budget without cutting Social Security and Medicare. Every state in these United States would be underwater from a budget perspective.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't have enough money to operate the state of Mississippi were it not for all the money we pull down from the federal government. In fact, we just passed legislation that phases out our income tax. Without the money the federal government borrows, we wouldn't be able to do that. Can you imagine if we lost all the money we get from the federal government?
Disaster.
We're bankrupt. We're done. That's how reliant the states have become on the federal government's ability to borrow money on an unlimited basis and run up what's about to be $40 trillion of debt. We should be working on a budget here in the state of Mississippi that presumes we don't get any dang federal money, or certainly accommodates cuts in federal spending sufficient to start getting our debt in line with our GDP, federal debt in line with GDP. We should be working on a budget in the state of Mississippi that aligns with that. That means we'd have to cut a bunch of spending here in the state of Mississippi. It means that we couldn't rely on the federal government to help our friend here with the fire equipment, our volunteer firefighter, we'd have to pay for that. The state, is we. What's wrong with that? We've gotten so accustomed to the federal teat and the largesse of the federal government, we don't even know how to function without it. Yep. And that's why we're for it. Because, as I've said many times, we all tell our representatives and our senators, you go up there and make sure we're fiscally responsible, but you send all that money back here to Mississippi, and you multiply that by 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate, you get $38 trillion of debt.
For Mississippi, for years, we punched above our weight.
Right.
When it came to grabbing money and bringing it back home.
Yeah, and we rewarded those people who run for office for doing that. We got to put them back in. They sent all that money home, except they're borrowing it. There's nothing noble, nothing creative, nothing innovative about borrowing money, which is essentially printed. They're just selling treasuries. It's unbelievable. But that's why we got 38, going to be 40 this time next year, trillion of debt. And I just don't see that stopping. Now, yesterday, the president, something else that's closer to home here, announced a $12 billion bailout for our farmers. $12 billion. Now, some people may get mad because I call it a bailout, but it's a $12 billion pot of money that's going to go out to farmers. It's my understanding, Will, and we may need to get somebody on to talk about it, that the timber industry in Mississippi, which is a big one, they're in the building here, so is not receiving any of this money, and they're struggling, last I heard. So,
well, you and I were talking about Europe and how it's impacting the Mississippi timber industry.
Big time.
They got regulations over there about deforestation and stuff that are impacting us.
The European Union deforestation rules, EUDR, and they're basically saying for them to buy our agricultural products, which includes our timber production, that we in the Mississippi and really in the whole country have to comply with the nutcase climate change European rules. Yep. That's horse hockey, in my view. And so Mississippi should not concede to that, in my opinion, and should hold the line on that. I honestly think this is a situation where the EU needs us more than we need them. And something else that related to that, just in the last couple of days, they're imposing, have you seen this, massive fines? I think it's on Google.
Yeah.
For not censoring content. You're not censoring enough. You're not blocking enough. That's the rules. That's how upside down Europe has become. And make no mistake, there are Democrats in this country that want to mirror what they're doing in Europe. So in this country, we want less smart, rational, clear-thinking people, conservative-minded people, want less censorship on these platforms. The EU says, no, you're not censoring enough. Here's a big old fat fine. You know what I think it is? They're insanely, I'm talking about Europe, jealous of this country because none of that comes from that country. Their systems are so socialist in nature now, so confiscatory in nature now, that there are no innovators in Europe that are creating these technologies. They all come from this country. Whether it's social media or the internet in general, artificial intelligence, medical science, almost all of that comes from this country. And I know that a lot of people don't like this because of the profit motive. They all get mad about these tech giants making all this money, yet they happily use everything they make.
Yeah.
And in Europe, I think their approach to competing with this country, we're just going to fine them. We're just going to pull money off their bottom line because they're not censoring enough. And, they got this whole suite of security policies called the General Data Protection Rules. I remember that before I sold my company, how we were all worried about how that was going to affect the cybersecurity technology companies in this country having to build in European-style GDPR, is what it's called, into cybersecurity technology that we use in this country, or you end up with two versions, just like Google. Well, we got to have an American version and we got to have a European version, and if somehow that slips, the European Union says, here, have some fines. Because they're jealous. They're envious that all that comes here. They don't have anybody over there. I just did an interview with someone that came over from England about 3 weeks ago that's noted that our per capita GDP in Mississippi now exceeds that of jolly old England. And we're 50th in per capita GDP.
Crazy.
It's because they've implemented all these socialistic policies. You can't produce any wealth or value or income. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
From the Seabrook
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Welcome to our shop
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Okay, now you have a good one.
That's the great Brad Delp on lead vocals, Boston, 1976, from their first album, Boston. Well, when I was a freshman at Ole Miss that year, that album could be heard across the campus in every room when people were spinning it on the old vinyl LPs. Man, it was super popular.
Maybe the best debut album of all time.
Yeah. Everybody had one. That's all I know. It was awesome. Enjoyed it. Of course, I also had it on 8-track in my vehicle.
Yeah.
What a pain that was.
And what song did it switch over? Did it do the little... Didn't 8-tracks used to... I never had one.
Yeah.
But I always heard that in the middle of it, it would have to switch over, and it would
Yeah, you'd hear a little click going on as it was going through the blank space on the tape. And the heads were moving about. That's what you heard, yeah. Oh, yeah. Awesome times. Little different these days. Yeah, Keith and Vaden said, let it play. We may have to do that one day. So we had someone on the C Spire text line that asked a question. Yeah, Mike from Corinth. I was just talking about if the federal government balanced its budget, that means severe cuts to all the money it showers upon the states, which would necessitate the states to huddle up and figure out how they're going to make ends meet because they don't have a printing press. Mississippi, I'm sorry to report, is the most dependent of all the 50 states on the money that comes from federal transfers, somewhere between $2.40 and up to $2.70 for every dollar we send. That's the ratio. There are some 14 states that actually do send more in tax revenue to the federal government than they receive. Now, make no mistake, Mike, that would actually affect, and Mike says, what state actually pays their own bills? None. I mean, to your point, and I get it. Even California, which sends more to the federal government than it receives back, and in fact at the highest ratio, even it receives a ton of money to run its Medicaid program. That's typically the number 2 line item behind education in a state's budget. It is in Mississippi. It costs the state of Mississippi right at $1 billion a year, but we get $6 billion to run the program from the federal government, having the highest federal match of the 50 states because it's based on per capita income. And though we're making strides, and the governor pointed that out yesterday, and I applaud him for doing so, we're on the right trend and trajectory. I just caution again, you got to be patient. We've had the lowest, by the way, per capita income and household median income since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started tracking that data 1929. We've been 50th every year. But we're making progress in that. A report just was released showing that we're number 2 in the nation for real wage growth, 5.7% real wage growth. Real wages, that's your nominal gross wages minus the inflationary effect of stuff you buy. So it's essentially adjusted for inflation. Is the way it works out. And the same is true about what's going on just across the federal landscape. We're not going back to 2019 pricing. And I know a lot of people think, wow, when we elect President Trump, he's going to take us back to the pre-COVID. It's crazy, Will, is it not? I don't think there's any way to eliminate this. Everything is pre-COVID, post-COVID. That's the marking point for so much, including, remember that in 2020, President Trump's last year, when all his advisors around him were telling him, sir, you got to do this, you got to do that. And look, as the president, he wanted to trust in them and believe in them, even though the nutcase Anthony Fauci.
Yep.
But point I'm making is the various COVID emergency relief bills and the quantitative easing that was applied by the Federal Reserve increased our debt in that 1 year by about $6 trillion. 1 year, $6 trillion. And then Joe Biden gets elected and can't stand the fact that the economy is on its way to recovering without any additional government intervention. And he pours fuel on the fire and dumps that stupid American Rescue Plan to the tune of $1.9 trillion on us. And that was dumb. I do think that we would have seen post-COVID inflation that hit its peak in 22 at 9.1%, but it wouldn't have been 9.1% had Joe Biden not insisted on distancing himself and separating himself from Mr. Trump and had to throw that American Rescue Plan on us and then told everybody that we're recovering. And everybody knew at that point that had a brain, this is going to cause even more inflation than the COVID spending of President Trump's last year was going to cause. Instead of a 9.1% inflation rate, we probably would have got around half that, 4.5 to 5, and then it would have come down. But we're still struggling to rid the country of this sticky inflation, which still hangs around that 3% rate. But where I'm going is we are seeing wage growth. So even though inflation is still with us, it's not growing at the rate it was, but we are seeing wage growth increase, and that wage growth is outpacing the cost of living through inflation. And Mississippi just experienced that calculation, real wages. We just were reported as being number 2 for this past year. That's awesome. That means we're on the right track. Be patient is the point. I think the best is yet to come and more is coming. But, yeah, no state, Mike, is the point, can do without significant change in their spending and their revenues, because all the states do balance their budget. They don't have the luxury the federal government does of just filling the gap by borrowing more money. We can't do that. And the reason we can sell our debt at the federal level is because investors know, well, if they have a problem, they'll just print money and pay me, which is inflationary. So the cost and the price we all pay for this reckless spending is inflation. How do we mitigate that? Productivity, AI, for example, and innovation, just producing more per work hour. Like I was talking earlier about building houses. The contractors can't find people to put on the jobs out there to build the houses. Okay. We'll just hire robots. The government wants to make, such as in California, the minimum wage for a fast food worker, $35 an hour. Okay. We just won't have any people. Because nobody's going to buy hamburgers at the price they'd have to charge for people making $35 an hour to flip burgers. You're talking about a $25 hamburger. Nobody's going to do that. So those are the consequences that the proponents of increasing the minimum wage, such as the Mississippi Democratic Party, is a very vocal proponent of increasing the minimum wage here in the state of Mississippi. I disagree with them. Paula Meridian says, yeah, they'll arrest you in London for posting something on Facebook that hurts somebody's feelings. You're right. We've witnessed that. There have been some cases we've talked about, Paul, on the show as well, and it's just crazy. But, again, I say that's a combination of them jumping the woke shark, and still I think, well, they're just insanely envious of this country's ability to produce all these wonderful innovations that everybody on the dang planet uses, and it all comes out of this country. It's not coming out of the UK. It's not coming out of Spain. It's not coming out of France and Italy. They're more concerned about how many days you don't work than they are days you work. It's true.
Yeah.
Have all kinds of crazy rules and regulations. Like, is it France? They, take off the whole month of August or something insane like that.
I mean, I always tell the story about Greece. I was over there when they were having, some major financial issues.
Yeah.
And one of the most lucrative jobs in Greece was working on the train system that goes throughout the country. And my wife and I went to go purchase a ticket to get on the train. And while she's over there, trying to purchase the ticket, of course, there's a language barrier. I noticed people just getting on the train.
Yeah.
And I thought, they must have a fast pass, right?
Yeah.
And I found somebody with English, and I was like, do they have a fast pass? They go, no, they just get on. They don't charge them.
Yeah.
Why don't they charge them? We go, well, elections are coming up, and, the people that get these jobs, it's a very lucrative job, and they don't want to screw it up by forcing somebody to not be on because they didn't have a ticket. And I sat there, I counted 100 people getting on without paying.
It's
we were the only idiots sitting there paying the three, and it was $3
for failure, man.
Yeah.
So just as we're talking about it on the TV in here, Will, the Chiron, EU slapping U.S. tech companies with huge fines. Yeah. Maybe they're tuned in to Middays. We're coming right back with the final segment of Middays on this Tuesday from the Element Wealth Studio.
Here's little Addie Ravenstein, Corey Ravenstein's daughter, and the 5th generation at Juniker Jewelry Company.
My favorite jewelry store in the world is Juniker Jewelry. At Juniker's, I come out and help to escape from school. I like serving customers and cleaning the jewelry before my dad catches me. And one day, I made my first sale to a woman. Well, it was my grandmother, though, but hey, who cares? It's still a customer. So she wanted to look at a pair of hoop earrings. She has a ton of them. I remember that she wanted some golden medium kind of size hoops with diamonds in them. I took them out, put them on top of the glass counter, and I let her play around for a little bit. She found just the right pair, and it was golden. She liked some silver ones too, but then again she had a bunch of silver ones, so she went with gold. We have a ton of diamond earrings at Juniker's. At Juniker Jewelry, they can make them a lot bigger. I love jewelry.
Juniker Jewelry Company, celebrating 80 years as Mississippi's direct diamond importer. 1485 Highland Colony Parkway and JunikerJewelry.com.
Hey, this is Bob, and if you're like me, you like dealing with local people. Majestic Metals was founded in Mississippi in 1954 and are headquartered right in Gluckstadt. For complete metal building systems and steel roofing and siding, call the hometown folks. Majestic Metals, 800-647-8540 or online at MajesticMetalsInc.com.
TrustCare is a proud sponsor of Ole Miss Athletics. When you choose TrustCare for your urgent and primary care, you win. TrustCare clinics are staffed by friendly, experienced providers and open late. Walk in today or schedule your appointment at TrustCareHealth.com. TrustCare. Feel better, faster.
This is Andy Gibson, your Commissioner of Agriculture and Commerce. Make this a genuine Mississippi Christmas. Shop local at the Genuine Mississippi store inside the Mississippi Farmers Market on High Street in Jackson. Tuesday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and Saturdays, 8 to 1. We've got something special for everyone on your list. A wide array of specialty foods, candles, jewelry, leather products, and so much more crafted right here in Mississippi. And Merry Christmas to you from Genuine Mississippi.
Calories is Everything that's growing green, that's what Callaway's is.
Callaway's is the most complete Christmas store around. We have a large selection of permanent Christmas trees, wreaths, and garlands, all 20% off and more, along with our Christmas ribbons, angels, Santas, water lanterns, and ornaments, all 20% off and more. Callaway's poinsettias and fresh-cut Christmas trees will be arriving the week before Thanksgiving. This is Brent Callaway. Since 1954, Callaway's has been family-owned and operated. Callaway's has a large selection of all your favorite trees, shrubs, and color plants. Don't forget to stop by and visit Callaway's Christmas store. All permanent Christmas trees, wreaths, and garlands, all 20% off and more, along with our Christmas ribbons, angels, Santas, water lanterns, and ornaments, all 20% off and more. Callaway's Christmas is a family tradition. Callaway's, Bloodstadt on Calhoun Station Parkway, south of Germantown High.
Tune in to Middays with Gerard Gibert each weekday, live from the Element Wealth Studios. Is retirement on your mind? Do you have a plan? Go to myelementwealth.com to find your balance between income, growth, and guarantees.
I'm Attorney General Lynn Fitch. All of us at the Attorney General's office wish you a very Merry Christmas. Best wishes for peace and joy, and visit AttorneyGeneralLynnFitch.com to stay up to date with what we're doing in the new year.
Purple Wave Auction remains the trusted leader in online equipment auctions. What makes the difference is you. You are part of our growing global community that continues to trust Purple Wave with the equipment that builds and feeds America. This trust placed in us by our community, from construction to ag producers and fleet drivers, brings great equipment opportunities to their next owners. Join the Purple Wave community today. PurpleWave.com.
Start your day right. Mornings with Richard Cross on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Properly set all controls before recording.
All systems go.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
That was all he wrote. He be making like a feline, heading for the borderline, going for broke. Saying one more hit ought to do it. This got it, nothing to it. One more for the road. Lead up.
Hey, Thomas, I know this is a shock to you, but yes, corporations do strive to control costs to improve profits. I know this is a shock to you. You sound more like Bernie Sanders every day, man. I don't know why you're so opposed to companies trying to find the lowest cost operating model that produces the most revenue. That's really the goal of every private business, is trying to figure out how do you balance that. You cut too deep, well, then your service levels drag and lag, and so do the quality of the products you provide. And if that's the case, then your revenue falls off. So you got to strike that very delicate balance. And so you're totally misreading what Microsoft's doing here by investing some money in India. By the way, they do sell their products in India. They do have lots of customers over there as well. So I don't see that that's necessarily bad. I know you're all hung up on the H-1B visa thing, and I'm not for those abuses either. There are more reports about problems finding physicians to staff up in these rural areas with the $100,000 fee for H-1B. So we're looking at more shortage of the supply of health care, which is going to drive the cost of health care up because of the H-1B visa reforms. Again, companies that are abusing that and not complying with the law, sure, they should suffer the consequences of that. But companies that are complying with the law and using it for benefit for all, got to let them do it. Otherwise, you need to be talking to representatives and senators about changing the law. It's really what needs to happen. So our local politicians talk about grants as if it's free money, says Bill in the Pine Belt. I hear you, and Bill, take note, and I know you do, based on you sending in that text, that they brag about it. Look at all this money I brought home, except half of it's borrowed. And the problem is, Will, if they don't do that, then nobody elects them, or they struggle election. You got to promise, you got to somehow promise, I'm going to go up there and cut spending, but I'm going to send money home. Doesn't work. You can't have both. We need all 535 marching to the beat of the same drummer, as the saying goes, as the metaphor goes. It's like, you know what? We're just going to cut out on all this. I do think that we ought to take a hard look, starting with the dismantling of the Department of Education and all the money that comes down from the federal government. It's about 28%, as I recall, of the state's K-12 education budget comes from Washington. And it's borrowed. Half of it's borrowed. Makes no sense. So if that money went away, well, then the state would have to cover it. But I'd much rather the state cover it in a responsible fashion than I would rely on the federal government borrowing money and mortgaging our future to keep people happy.
Because Mississippi, you have to have a balanced budget, correct?
Yeah, all states do. Now, that doesn't mean they can't go out and borrow money, because they can't.
Yeah.
Right? So balancing revenues with expenses simply means that you've got the means to do that. The difference is that the federal government doesn't have any problem selling treasuries because they know the federal government has a printing press. States can get overextended, right?
Yeah.
If they don't manage that appropriately, and then when they do need to borrow money for a rainy day or some setback, sorry, the market says, we can't rely on you guys, and that's when your bond rating suffers, and you either can't sell your debt or you have to sell it at a much higher cost because it's considered higher risk, especially when you got investors have 50 states' debt to choose from. Our PERS program is starting to cause problems there. The investors know that. Good news is we're not having to go borrow money here in the state. We're able to keep up. Revenues exceed our budget. And to a great extent, just like all the states, we benefited from the largesse of the COVID money, no doubt. That helped a lot. But if we got to a point where we're borrowing money again, no doubt that investors will consider, you got this PERS program over here that you guys are going to have to address, and I think that's going to be a high priority come the 26th legislative session. It's gotten some attention and some discussion. I was thinking back at the article I wrote that's on the SuperTalk.fm website about PERS, November 23. So it got discussed in 24, it got discussed in 25. We got a new tier created in 25. That's receiving a lot of pushback now. And then 26 is rolling around, and they've got some tough decisions to make. You know, if you really want to shore it up, you need a dedicated stream of revenue, and that will be about $200 million a year for several years to get it where it needs to be. We are out of here today. Thank you so much for joining us. Back with you again tomorrow from the Element Wealth Studio. Stay safe, and God bless everyone.
SuperTalk Mississippi Media Production.